Our next paper is BGP-iSec, Improving Security of Internet Routing Against Post-ROV Attacks. And Cameron Morris from University of Connecticut will be presenting it. So please take the stage.
Okay, is the mic's working? Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Cameron Morris from the University of Connecticut, and I'll be presenting BGP-iSec, Improved Security of Internet Routing Against Post-ROV Attacks. Internet routing is a large challenge that I expect many of you in the audience are already familiar with. So for that reason, I'll be skipping background on basic BGP, and instead we'll jump right into routing attacks. So BGP lacks authentication, despite the fact that BGP sessions are often authenticated between autonomous systems, between ASs, using something like TLS or IPsec. BGP is still vulnerable to rogue AS attacks. For example, a route leak. So here, AS666 is our attacker, is leaking the route to AS3. We know this is a route leak because it starts at AS11, goes up to 1, up to 2, then down to 666, and back up to 3. This is a violation of valley-free routing rules and is one kind of route leak. We also have prefix hijacks, where an AS will falsely originate a prefix that it is not authorized to. In this case, 666 would be originating the prefix that belongs to AS11. We have subprefix hijacks, which are the same as a prefix hijack, except a more specific subprefix. In our example, we have 1.2.3/24, the more specific subprefix being sent to AS12. We also have origin hijacks, where the attacker will falsely claim to be a neighbor of the true origin. So there is no link between 666 and 11, but the path here is 666.11. There are path manipulation attacks, which are a more general kind of attack. It's any path that does not reflect the true sequence of ASs that the update traversed. In our example here, AS1 is missing. And finally, we have attribute manipulations, which are manipulations of any of the other path attributes that are sent in a BGP update message that can potentially significantly change the meaning of the announcement. For example, a black hole attribute would be a significant change. BGP security has a long history, and we don't have time to cover all 35 years here. So I've highlighted a few papers that are particularly relevant to BGP-iSec. The first is Secure Border Gateway Protocol, SBGP. This was the first comprehensive proposal on how to secure and authenticate the information in a BGP update message. Funny enough, this was actually presented at NDSS 25 years ago, and we're still here talking about it. A lot of other things happened besides that. In 2012, we got the RPKI, or at least the RFC that defines the specification of the RPKI. In 2016, we got a more specific, more precise definition of route leaks from the IETF. And in 2017, we got the BGPsec protocol specification. So in this work, we focus on post-ROV routing attacks. And by that, we mean that ROV, route origin validation, is continuing to be deployed. Its deployment is increasing, and one recent estimate put the deployment as high as 40%, which is a lot. And that leads us to expect that sometime in the near future, these prefix hijacks and subprefix hijacks that are mitigated by ROV are going to be less viable for attackers seeking to hijack traffic. So we focus only on these four here, these four remaining attacks for this work. But we aren't the first work to look at post-ROV routing attacks, especially path manipulations. The IETF standardized BGPsec in 2017. The way that BGPsec works, in a nutshell, is instead of using the unauthenticated AS path attribute, ASs use secure path segments, which contain a signature block that authenticates the information in the BGP update, as well as the next AS that it's being sent to. So here, AS1, AS1 signs that it's sending to AS2. AS2 validates signature 1, attaches its own signature block that validates that, or that signs that it's sending to AS3. 3 verifies 1 and 2 signatures, and so on. One of the problems with BGPsec is that when a non-BGPsec AS is on the path, here in our example, AS3 will not send any signatures to AS4. So BGPsec ASs that are further down along the path, like AS5, are not able to authenticate any of the path information, despite the fact that most of this path is running BGPsec. And the result of this is very limited benefits in partial deployment. There are a few reasons that BGPsec does this. One of the main reasons is that BGPsec has no registry of adopting ASs. There's no, and an adopting AS may stop signing at any time for a number of reasons. Performance is one of them. But if an adopting AS can stop signing at any time, then there's also no way to prevent an attacker from simply removing the signatures. So we see a few areas that we could potentially improve on BGPsec. One is the security benefits are currently limited to those BGPsec islands. 2 is that the downgrade attack is trivial for an on-path attacker. 3, there is no defense against route leaks. Now, to be fair, defending against route leaks was never part of the design goals of BGPsec. However, it is a post-ROV routing attack, so we want to defend against it. And last is that only the AS path is protected in BGPsec. So the other attributes, which, like we said, can significantly change the meaning of a BGP update, are not authenticated by BGPsec. At this point, I also want to acknowledge that there are significant performance challenges that need to be overcome before BGPsec can be adopted. But in this work, we focus mostly on the security aspects. Well, focus entirely on the security aspect. And so that leads us to our contribution, BGP-iSec. In BGP-iSec, we aim to improve the security of BGPsec in partial adoption by doing a few things. We prevent unauthorized downgrades, so identify adopters and their public keys. We enable partial path verification, so we bridge those BGPsec islands so that you can validate across them, authenticate integrity-protected attributes besides the AS path, and prevent route leaks. We evaluate the separate components of BGP-iSec using custom extensions to the BGPi simulator. So this is the link to the BGPi GitHub. We have a separate link in our paper to the custom extensions. And we use 2 attacker strategies in our evaluation. The first is an aggressive attacker. The aggressive attacker always does a one-hop origin hijack, so falsely announcing that they are a neighbor to the true origin, where we have a randomly selected origin. We also have a shortest path export all attack, which has been used in other works, where the attacker shortens the path as much as they can without being detected by any defenses. So in this case, the attacker will avoid invalidating any signatures. We have a couple attacker models in our paper, but here we're only presenting one. That is, we call it the global attacker. The attacker controls one malicious AS. They receive all BGP announcements sent by every AS, but they do not receive the BGP-iSec attributes. Our other assumptions for our evaluation, so we assume post-ROV, 100% coverage of ROAs and 100% ROV adoption. We don't need 100% ROV adoption. Really all we need is enough ROV adoption that it's no longer practical to do prefix or subprefix hijacks. We assume 100% just for simplicity. We assume valley-free routing. We use the CADA Serial 2 dataset for our AS relationships. And we assume that there is some mechanism where the adopting ASs can identify other adopting ASs and know their public keys. For example, the RPKI. So next I'll go over the different BGP-iSec components. First will be our path integrity defense, which we call transitive signatures, and then our 3 route leak defense mechanisms. when we say transitive signatures in BGP-iSec, we mean that we set the transitive bit to true on the signatures and also send signatures to non-adopting ASs. So here, AS1 sends its signature to AS2 despite the fact that 2 is not running BGP-iSec, which allows 3 to validate that first part of the path. So 3 can still validate that 1 did intend to send to AS2. And this also allows us to enforce downgrade prevention. So the fact that signature 1 was sent by AS2, the fact that it is, if it was not there, then that would be a sign that there was a downgrade, an intentional downgrade attack. So in the simulation results, we can see that just by preventing intentional downgrades and validating partial paths, this yellow line here, by the tail end, it's reducing the impact of post-ROV routing attacks by about half. This, of course, has some overhead. The overhead being that these non-adopting ASs need to store those signatures in their routing tables and propagate them to other ASs. On the other hand, this orange line here is the cost of not doing that, which is very limited security benefits in partial adoption. To solve that other half of the problem, we need route leak prevention. So our first route leak prevention mechanism uses an attribute that's already defined by the IETF called only to customer, OTC. The attribute as defined in the RFC is something that is sent to customers when the announcement should only propagate downward. But as it is defined in the RFC, it's not authenticated, which means that it only works to protect against accidental or misconfigurations that cause route leaks. Now, many of the route leaks that occur today in the internet are accidental misconfigurations, so there is still value to this. And we see some deployment in real production ASs of the OTC attribute as it's defined in the RFC. In BGP-iSec, we extend it very slightly by authenticating the OTC attribute using transitive signatures to also protect against malicious route leaks. And this works. This purple line does eventually reach 0, which is kind of exciting, because by changing a few things about BGPsec and authenticating an attribute that already exists and is deployed in production, we were able to get a solution that eventually eliminates the effect, reduces the impact to 0 of post-ROV routing attacks. But we didn't stop there, because there's a lot of space here on the graph. So we have 2 other route leak prevention mechanisms that do slightly better in partial adoption. Our second route leak prevention mechanism is, we call them up attributes for up permitted. The mechanism has 2 attributes. There's an up pre-image, which is a random string, and an up image, which is the hash of that random string. When an announcement is permitted to travel upward to be propagated to providers, it contains both the pre-image and the image, and when it's sent downward, it only contains the image. So the pre-image, that random string, is removed. Since hashes are not reversible, this means that once an announcement is sent downward, it can't be sent back up. In our simulations, this does do better than OTC because it stops route leaks earlier. However, it has the drawback of, by being hash-based, an eavesdropping adversary could potentially capture the hash pre-image. And that's not an unrealistic scenario given route collectors, RIPE, route views, even looking glass servers. In fact, it's somewhat expected that the adversary would likely be able to capture this. So to mitigate that, we developed the provider cone ID mechanism, which protects against route leaks even when an attacker can eavesdrop on the BGP session traffic. The way that this works is, for example, AS1 here will build a provider cone ID list containing the nearest BGP-iSec ASs in its provider cone. So for example, here, AS2 is included in the list and AS4. AS3 is not included because it's not running BGP-iSec. AS5 is not included because it's beyond the nearest BGP-iSec AS. And what that list means then is that 2 and 4 are the only BGP-iSec ASs that should accept an update from 1 on a customer interface, where 1 is the most recent BGP-iSec AS on the path. In full adoption, this becomes very similar to ASPA, if that's something you're familiar with. And this works even better. The green line here is better than the other 2 approaches, and the strong thing about this is it stays that way even when the adversary has full eavesdropping capabilities. There is overhead associated with maintaining the provider cone ID list, and AS has to know its provider cone. However, we found using the Kata graph that the median provider cone size is only 30. It's around 30, which we expect is likely reasonable for most ASs to manage. On the topic of overhead, we also compare to BGPsec. Our intention here is not to show that BGP-iSec is better than BGPsec, but just that it isn't worse. The additional signatures that are verified in partial deployment from BGP-iSec come from partial path verification. And as adoption approaches 100%, the 2 lines converge to the same point. In the paper, we also do a security analysis that shows BGP-iSec has no false positives, prevents route leaks in full deployment, prevents visible route leaks in partial deployment, and provides announcement integrity under full deployment. So in conclusion, we present BGP-iSec. We don't intend this necessarily to be a complete proposal, but we really hope that these individual mechanisms and presenting these will form a basis for further discussion and further ideas on defending against post-ROV routing attacks. So thank you all, and I'll take questions.
Any questions?
Ronald Vrijsek-Dij, University of Twente, Netherlands. Thank you, interesting talk. I have a question. So you mentioned ASPA very briefly in the presentation, and I guess you're going to guess the obvious question. How would you position your work next to what they're trying to do with ASPA in the ITF?
Yes, so I think a lot of it's complementary. Evaluation of ASPA is something we're looking to do in future work. We definitely want to compare this with ASPA. We think there's a lot of synergy between transitive signatures and ASPA because somewhat like the OTC mechanism, it provides route leak prevention, and then if we authenticate the AS path, that sounds like a good combination. So yeah, that's something we're looking towards in future work. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Lan Chengqing from Tsinghua University. I'm really happy to see this work, and I think this solution could be useful and effective, but I still have a question about the provider coin ID. Actually, I have sent my comments to Amir via email earlier in CIDROP's mailing list. And so, I mean, I think identify the whole provider coin is kind of difficult. Maybe in the future we can use ASPAR to identify the provider coin. So, I mean, how can we do to make sure the provider coin is correct now?
So to make sure I understood the question correctly, you said how can we ensure the protocol is correct?
Yeah.
And especially focusing on the provider cone ID mechanism. So would that mean how do we ensure the provider cone ID list is correct, or are you referring to more formal proof that the provider cone ID mechanism works?
Okay, well, thank you. But I mean, until now, I'm more interested in identifying the provider coin, not the provider coin ID.
Okay.
Because we should first identify the provider coin, and then we can compute the provider coin ID, right?
Okay, I think I understand the question. So how we looked at it was that an AS should know its immediate providers. And as it has a business relationship with them, it should be able to either send an email or communicate with them some way to verify that an AS is their provider. So then they know their provider's provider, and that chain would continue on. And since most paths on the internet are short, the average AS path length is 4, that hopefully that chain doesn't get too long. The average size of the provider cone in the CADA topology being 30 was another mitigating factor, that it's only 30 ASs, so for most of the time. There are some where it's larger, but in the common case, we expect the number to be small enough that it would be possible to manually verify that provider cone.
Okay, maybe we could talk more.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker again.